Well, welcome to you all. So for those of you who just completed the Art of Meditation class, we're a little more traditional with this one because we are going into a Vedanta text. So our tradition here is that we start by chanting 3 verses from a hymn called the Hymn to the Guru, Guru Stotram. And for this evening, if you know it, join in. If not, you'll see it on your handout. And then we'll spend some time learning it next week. Then that's followed by what we call a Shanti mantra. These are mantras that are from the Upanishads. And the one we're going to do tonight, the Om Sahana Vavatu, invokes our study together. So you'll see a transliteration and an English translation of it. So we'll start with that this evening. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trilokyam Sacharacharam Atmabodha Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Twameva Mata Chapita Twameva Bandhuscha Sakha Twameva Vidya Ravinam Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Twameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karavavahai, Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. So we do the 3 verses of the hymn to the Guru. I do this out of devotion and respect for my teacher, Swami Chinmayananda. And then we do the second one to invoke the Lord's grace on our study. So tonight we're doing Atmabodha, knowledge of the self. This is written by an 8th century saint named Shankara, sometimes known as Adi Shankara. Adi just means etc., by the way. Also, the first in the series. So he's the first Shankara in this tradition. Etc. Shankara. Or sometimes he's called Shankaracharya. Acharya just means teacher. Shankara is another name for Shiva, by the way. Just, but that was the dude's name. His dates are from 788 to 820. Now we have problems with this because he wrote an enormous amount. So it's impossible for one person to have written all that in 32 years. So either he lived longer and we don't know about it, or there may have been a school around him. We know, in fact, there was. And some of his disciples may have written works and attributed them to Shankara. Just out of humility. But it doesn't matter. So of the works that he wrote, he is most well known for what are called the Shankara Bhashya. Bhashya is a commentary. So he wrote a commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. He wrote one on the principal Upanishads, the 11 of them. And then he wrote a commentary on the Brahma Sutras. These are dense philosophical works. Very good. Then he wrote a particular style of writing, which are called prakarana. These are workbooks. This book we're starting tonight is in that genre. He also wrote devotional hymns. In fact, about 3/4 of all the works attributed to him are devotional hymns. And he is considered a stature of someone like Thomas Aquinas would be in the West, and poetry like Shakespeare. So he brings those two together. So this particular text is written in poetry. So we have a wonderful chanter with us tonight. Because of my loss of sight, I can no longer chant the verses, and I wasn't very good at it anyway. So we're very, very lucky. So did you take a peek at the Pratasmarami Hridi or not?
Yes.
Okay, so at the beginning of the book, you'll see a poem called Pratasmarana Stotram. And this is the very first verse of it. And let's get a taste of some of Shankara's poetry. You didn't get a book?
No, I don't know.
What pages?
7.
Go for it, girl.
Pratasmarami hridi samspuradatmatattvam Satchit sukham param aham sangatim turiyam yat swapna jagara sushuptamavaitti nityam tat brahma nishkalam aham na cha bhuta sangaha.
And the English?
In the early hours of the day, I meditate upon the essential self, clearly experienceable in the heart cave, that which is existence, knowledge, bliss in nature, that which is the supreme goal, the Paramahamsa state, that which is in the fourth plane of consciousness, which constantly illumines all experiences in the dream, waking, and deep sleep conditions. I am that pathless Brahman, not this assemblage of matter envelopments.
Absolutely a beautiful poem. We're not going to go into it deeply because it's not really a part of this text. But go over the English at least. And if we have time at the end of the class, I'll play the entire hymn for you. It's not very long. It's really quite lovely. So let's now get into the first verse. The word for verse in Sanskrit is shloka. So that's what a shloka is. Shloka is a verse.
Tapo bihi shina papanam shantanam vitaraginam mumukshana apeksho yatma yo Atmabodha vidhiyate.
And the English?
I am composing this Atmabodha, the treatise on the self-knowledge, for those who have purified themselves by austerities, who are peaceful in heart, who are free from cravings and desirous of liberation.
So the first thing that Shankara says is, who's this text for? It's not for the casual person. I want to learn a little bit about spirituality. It's not for a person who has not yet begun to do some practices. It's not for the person says, oh yeah, I meditate, I do it after my Pilates class and before my aromatherapy. No, that's not who it's for. So let's peel it apart bit by bit. The first idea again.
I am composing this Atmabodha, the treatise on the self-knowledge, for those who have purified themselves by austerities.
Yes. And the word here is tapas, meaning we've taken some time to try to acquire some purity of mind. What do we mean by purity of mind? In the beginning, we're dealing with thought replacement. If I am habituated to negative thinking, I endeavor to change those habits of thinking into more positive ones. But that's only a first step. Now, if you watch the commercial on zero filter for your water filter, anybody seen that commercial on TV? So they're comparing it to the Brita water filter. So you've got so many parts per thousand or million in the water. So if you do it through the Brita water filter, it purifies it up to 200 and some parts per million. But if you use the zero water filter, guess how many parts per million of other stuff is in there? Zero. So a pure mind in the end doesn't mean more and more good thoughts. In the end, it's not about trying to make my vulgar personality into something that's super saintly. That process is like trying to count to the highest number. We need to do it to some degree because our minds get agitated if we're living a vulgar life. If we're lying and cheating and stealing and dealing with shame and guilt and anger and resentment, it's going to be hard to meditate. But here what Shankara is talking about is a person who has to some degree been able to empty out the mind. In the last class, we talked about the three gunas, tamas, rajas, and sattva. Tamas, illusion, delusion, the grossest form of the mind. Rajas, where we have all this activity, my desires, my ambitions, but my resentments, my competition. Sattva, where the mind is peaceful, it's non-activity, where I'm content in the present. I'm able to be at peace by and large. I'm not saying you totally accomplish this, absolutely. but we've worked on it to some degree. So if you don't think you're ready yet, don't worry about it. You wouldn't be here if you weren't ready. Those whose minds are too gross, don't come in the door. Next idea.
Who are peaceful in heart.
So once we start to commit to the spiritual life, things start to happen. And at some point, there's a huge shift. For many of us, when we begin the spiritual life, our thought is, my life is miserable, I'm unhappy, I'm not getting what I want, my relationships aren't where they were, I don't like my job. If I meditate, maybe my life will be better. I'll get a better relationship, I'll get more money, I'll get a bigger house, etc. I'll manifest maybe. And after a while, everything shifts. It's like turning over the hourglass. And we begin to see that the goal of the spiritual life is our freedom. The word in Sanskrit is moksha, which means freedom. It means liberation. We frequently will say self-realization, enlightenment. But the actual word the scriptures use is moksha, having a liberated personality and free. So when that becomes our goal, then everything in life becomes useful. If you find yourself waiting for a bus, okay, the Lord is giving me the opportunity to practice patience. You know, you have a gnarly customer at work or a client. Oh, the Lord has given me the opportunity to practice forgiveness and acceptance. Always, there's everything in life starts to become useful for our side. Huge shift when that starts to happen. So this text is for people who have begun to see that to some degree. Next idea.
Who are free from cravings.
Yes. So those of you who took the Art of Meditation class, remember the very first lecture. What does it feel like to want something you don't have?
Suffering.
It's suffering. Now let's put physical illness or pain on the shelf. For now, that's a little bit different. Yoga says there is no other suffering than wanting stuff you don't have, or the flip side, aversion. I can't stand what's going on and I want to get rid of it. Or what I call the neurotic form. I have what I want, but I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. Yoga says, look to your direct experience. Can you find any other kind of suffering? So we divide the world into bhogies and yogis. A bhogi, B-H-O-G-I, practices bhoga, which means enjoyment. But the deeper meaning is this: a bhogi wants happiness. And he thinks that the way to get happiness is to satisfy as many desires as possible. not realizing that it's like feeding the fire. The more you get, the more you want. More, better, different, more, better, different, more, better, different. Now, a yogi practices yoga, which literally just means union. A yogi also wants happiness. But a yogi, understanding the whole phenomenon of suffering, lives a life where she endeavors to reduce the number of desires entertained. Probably the clearest worldly example of this we find in the recovery community. So the bogey, more drugs, more alcohol, and more, till you become a slave. But the mind says, if you had my problems, you'd drink too. Then we have a condition that we call being a dry drunk. This is a person who gets rid of the booze or the drugs, but doesn't deal with being restless, irritable, and discontent. And they're miserable and nasty, unhappy. And after a while, you want to say, for God's sake, take a drink for the rest of us. But those people who go into recovery endeavor to have a spiritual experience so that the compulsion, the desire to drink and use has been lifted. There is a present time worldly example of exactly what yoga's been saying for thousands of years. What's the difference between the addict alcoholic and you and me? Not a whole lot. It's just that the drugs and the alcohol aren't very socially acceptable. That's really about the only difference. Did you ever wanted to say something?
No, I just love that.
So here, Shankara says, this text is for people who have at least begun to understand that if I'm unhappy, it's not because I don't have what I want. I'm unhappy because I'm a slave to craving. Now, I have many friends and acquaintances who identify as being practicing Buddhists. And if you ask them, oh, what's your understanding of the Four Noble Truths? Well, what are they? No, I'm not kidding. They don't know what they are. This was the Buddha's first teaching. It was the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. All the rest of the Buddhist path is based on them. Noble truth number one, dukkha satya, the truth of suffering. Life, the way most of us live it, sucks. The truth of suffering. Noble truth number two, samudaya satya.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
Samudaya satya, meaning the acquisition of things, the accretion of things, the arising of things, that's usually then broken down into kama, craving, trishna, thirsting, spriha, longing. The cause of my suffering is craving. Yoga says exactly the same thing. Noble truth number 3, Nirodha Satya, the truth of cessation. Freedom from craving is freedom from suffering. And we experience it, the ordinary person, in 2 states. One, when we satisfy the desire. I want a pizza. When I get the pizza, the desire for the pizza is gone. And in deep sleep. No matter how miserable your life is, you go to sleep, deep sleep, no mind, no craving. Especially if you've got, oh, what am I going to do? My life is so terrible. You go to sleep. Wake up in the morning. Oh, that was so wonderful. Oh, my terrible life. No, I want to go back to sleep. You know that feeling? As the suffering goes away. Noble truth number 4, Marga Satya. Marga means a road or a path. The truth of the path. The Eightfold Path in Buddhism, we would call it sadhana, our practice. So, at least don't embrace a rotting corpse thinking it's a beautiful bride. That's what Shankar says. We may not yet have the insight to be able to let go of our addictive relationship to certain parts of our lives. I may still have the compulsion to control others. I may still have fear of financial insecurity. I still may resent people who annoy the hell out of me. So many things. But at least see them for what they are. There I am, stuck, wanting again. When I was in the ashram doing my sadhana means spiritual practice. My nickname for my mind was Buddha. What's Buddha mean?
No, food.
Fool. There I am, wanting again, want. And the ego mind always says, I'm unhappy because I don't have what I want. The world isn't behaving. God's an underachiever. He's not doing it my way. And yoga says, fool, you are suffering because you are stuck craving. So here, Shankara says, who is free from craving, the subtle understanding for us. Again, we don't dress it up anymore. We understand why I'm unhappy. If I am disturbed, no matter the cause, meaning the world and its people are oftentimes quite wrong. But if I'm upset, if I'm disturbed, I'm the one, and I'll give you the Sanskrit word, klesha. Klesha means an affliction. I'm the one with the attachment. I'm the one with the identification. I'm the one with the control issue. I'm the one with the problem. It's axiomatic. So here Shankara says this text is for people who have at least begun to understand that. My problem is not getting my needs met. Our needs are very few: food, clothing, and shelter, basically. I'm suffering because I have compulsive longing.
So Jim, I have a
Yes.
question. I guess for me, the solution has been detachment.
We'll get there.
Okay.
That's
all right.
exactly what we do.
Okay.
Let it go.
You let it go.
But the detachment is the result of insight.
Ah, okay.
See, to detach out of a moral precept, oh, I should be detached to be a goody goody.
Right. No, that doesn't work.
That doesn't work. That doesn't work. We detach because we clearly understand what's going on.
It
Excellent.
works.
Excellent. Did you all understand what she was saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. That gives us the impetus to let go, let go. And we've all had this experience. You're driving on the freeway and you're supposed to be someplace at 4 o'clock and you're caught in rush hour traffic and you know you're going to be late and the SOB in the car in front of you is going too effing slow and you try to push the traffic with your stomach muscles gripping the wheel. You ever done that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Then you start yelling at the person because you're the only one in your car. And then after a while you go, I'll get there when I get there. Now you're not moving any faster. What did you do? Detach. Let go. Give up the desire. Now, I'm going to be about 15 minutes late. Sorry. But what you've done is somehow not solve the struggle of ego, but got rid of the struggling. Better yet, the struggler. All this is all in the first verse.
I think we're done.
Oh no, it's better.
This is fantastic.
All right, next idea.
And are desirous of liberation.
Yes, so listen carefully. Self-realization, moksha, is not difficult. You don't need a great high IQ. You don't have to speak Sanskrit. You don't have to go traipsing off to India. Now, Sanskrit's a beautiful language. India is a beautiful and wonderful country. But self-realization is not difficult. But it is very rare. And it's rare because nobody wants it. In this wonderful text called the Yoga Vasishta, it's the story of the enlightenment of Lord Ram. There's a fellow, and in his field, he finds the Chinta money. Money is a jewel. The Chinta money is mythological. It's the wish-fulfilling gem. It's kind of India's version of Aladdin's lamp. Chinta money. But he doesn't recognize it for what it is. So he leaves it. And he's all excited because he's found little shards of broken colored glass. Oh, look what I found. So that's you and me. We get an exposure to this work. We're in the Easter season in the Christian church. Whenever Jesus shows up, first thing he says is Shalom Aleichem. So close to Salam Alaikum.
Yes.
What does it mean? Peace be with you. I bring you a peace that the world does not understand. That's the promise. But you and I say, oh no, I'd rather have a Cadillac. I'd rather have lots of sex. Oh no, I'd rather have all my friends think I'm wonderful. That's what we do. Now, can I borrow your book again real quick? So if you look at the cover of the book, this is for the Zoomies. Anybody know what that is on the cover?
I can't. Is it the rope? No,
Is it a snake?
The snake or the rope?
it's the rope.
Is it a snake or is it a rope? So here is the classic Vedanta image. Raju Sarva. Sarva Raju. Snakes and ropes, ropes and snakes. So you all know the story. The fellow steps on a wet length of rope and he thinks it's a snake. Filled with fear. And his companion says, no, look down, inquire, investigate. Oh no, it's too scary. I can't look at it. He's going to bite me. Look. Sure enough, it looked like a snake, but it's not a snake. It's a rope. This phenomenon is called adhyasa, superimposition. So we lose the awareness of our own self-nature as pure existence, pure consciousness, and the fountainhead of all joy. Instead, I'm my body and my personality, which is of course terrible. I'm the piece of poop that the whole world revolves around. A narcissist with low self-esteem. And I'm in this poverty. I just want to suck on the world. Gimme, 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 gimme. That's the snake. We've missed the rope, the truth of our own self-nature. In Shankara's very famous hymn, Panashaka Kamyo, have the refrain that goes, Chidananda Rupaham, Shivoham, Shivo. I am of the form of bliss consciousness. I am Shiva. I am auspiciousness. I think that's all the pieces in the verse, right? Is there more?
No, that was the last one.
All right. Any questions about any of that?
It's a lot.
Now, if you don't think you're qualified because of this verse, don't worry about it.
Oh,
God's
I thought you were gonna say you have to leave now.
no. God's grace can make us all fit. And if we especially have the mumukshutva, the burning desire for freedom, for liberation, all that other stuff comes.
All right, second verse.
बोधो साधनेभ्यो हि साक्षान् मोक्षैक्य साधनाम् पाक्ष्य वाहिनी वज्ञानम् वीन मोक्षो न सिद्ध्यति. Just as the fire is the direct cause for cooking, knowledge is the direct means of liberation. Compared to all other forms of discipline, knowledge of the self is the only direct means of liberation.
So if Wendy's a chef, so if you're going to roast a chicken, you can put olive oil on the chicken, you can stuff the chicken, put herbs on the chicken, you can put little rice stuffing in it, stuff like that. You can tie up its legs and you put it on top of the stove and you wait. What happens?
Nothing. It doesn't cook.
What's the direct cause for roasting your chicken?
Heat, fire.
Yeah. Now, this is a point about which many of us get confused. What is my problem? Why am I unhappy? What is my bandha, bondage? The scriptures thunder that the cause of my bondage is ignorance of my essential nature. I do not know who I am, what I am. Then I subsequently think I'm something else. So it is an epistemological problem, not an ontological problem. Those are philosophical terms. Ontology is the study of being. Your being isn't going to change from miserable individual creature into godlike thing. That's not what happens. Epistemology is the science of knowing. My problem is I do not know who I am. Therefore, I mistakenly think I'm something else. Let me see if I can give you an example. So, there's a lady. She's living in a little studio apartment in the Tenderloin, cooking her meals on a little hot plate, living on SSI. And she does not know that she's the only living relative of a very wealthy woman who died. In fact, she's a multimillionaire. And the people who are the executors of the state are looking all over for her. She is a wealthy woman. Her problem is not that she is not a wealthy woman. What's her problem? She doesn't know. Anybody else here like to watch Antiques Roadshow? Not Antiques Roadshow. True story. I'm watching Antiques Roadshow. This gal brings in this brooch. It was her great grandmother's. And she had it appraised by some appraiser who said, well, it's costume jewelry, it's antique, but it's worth maybe a couple $100. Big old fat blue stone in the middle and a bunch of little chips around, and it's looks like it's set in silver. So she takes it to the Antiques Roadshow, and the fellow says, well, I have news for you. That's actually a sapphire. And these little things are diamonds set around it. And the setting is not silver, it's platinum. So this antique piece of jewelry is worth about $250,000. And I keep it in my junk drawer. Better insured. So did the brooch become valuable? What changed?
Knowledge.
Her knowledge. Now, if my problem is ignorance of my essential nature, actions do not dispel ignorance, because actions do not contradict ignorance. Knowledge, which is the fruit of investigation, dispels ignorance. Let me give you an example. I'm thinking of an arithmetic problem. How many jumping jacks do you have to do to know the arithmetic problem? How many push-ups do you have to do? How much fasting do you have to do? How many prayers do you have to do? Wendy asked me what the problem is.
What's the problem?
5 plus 3 is 8. What dispelled your ignorance?
Asking a question, inquiry.
Inquiry, and then you got knowledge. So many of us will fast, stay up all night chanting, do a ton of Hail Marys in Our Fathers, go on pilgrimages, do all sorts of austerities, trying to become spiritual. And it doesn't work because it doesn't address the problem. Any questions about this? Now, why do the various spiritual traditions suggest purify your diet, purify your body, be in good health, chant the name of the Lord, maybe go on a pilgrimage, go to the temple or the church or the mosque, etc.? Why do they suggest that? These are preparatory practices. Preparatory practices. Just like we had in the first verse where we talked about gaining this purity of mind. These things do help, but they of themselves are not the cause of knowledge.
Jim, don't you think it depends on the culture too?
No,
Really?
no.
Because when I was at this ashram, I was surrounded by all these images of saints
Mhm.
that don't affect me at all because I have no story attached to any of these gods and goddesses.
Stories will not free you.
But the Hindus that see these have a direct connection, they feel, to a god or goddess.
And they certainly do, just as a Christian might to Jesus, or a
Right.
Jew, but that will not free you.
Well, I'm
It'll
not saying it
just warm
does.
the heart.
I'm just saying it's a cultural overlay. It's one of your superimpositions.
It's just another form of action.
Right.
It helps to purify the head and heart. but it will not in and of itself give you freedom.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
And that's where people east and west can get stuck.
Mhm. I agree. I agree.
There are many paths up the mountain of truth, but there's only one temple at the top, which only has one door. And the temple is yourself, and the door is your very experience of I. You need to find out who you are. Now, how you get up to that temple can vary by culture. Does that make it a little clearer?
No, that's what I was saying, basically. Yeah.
Yes.
But I think we have to be understanding of that rather than, kind of have a knee-jerk reaction. Like, that's just a painting. For me, it's just a painting, but for somebody from that culture,
You're
it's more.
missing my point, sweetheart.
No, I'm getting it, but I think it's part, for me, it's part of my
But
process.
do you think a painting of the Blessed Virgin Mary is just a painting?
Right.
I'm not saying people don't have emotional connections to images.
Right. Me too.
That will not free you.
No, I agree 100%.
That's the point.
But I think for me, I'm not saying for everyone, for me, it was important to allow them to have that experience rather than say that's not the point to them.
It's who, well, if you're not, here's another thing. All we can ever do is our own yoga.
Okay, I agree with that.
Never try to do somebody else's yoga.
Right. But for me, my yoga had to include allowing them their yoga.
Absolutely.
That's all I'm saying.
All right. So the point Shankara is saying here, just as fire is the direct cause of cooking, my problem is ignorance. The antidote to ignorance is knowledge. Any questions about this?
How do you get to the knowledge of self?
That's what the whole book's about.
That is a big question.
That's why it's called Atmabodha. Bodha means knowledge. Atma means yourself. So he's setting up what we're going to study and why.
Makes sense.
All right. Any questions about this? And there are preparatory practices. The worship of idols, the worship of saints is one of those preparatory exercises. Going on pilgrimages. But in the end, we have to leave those behind. Next verse.
Avirodhitaya karma na vidyam vinibhadyayet vidya vidyam nihantyeva tejasasmi rasanghavat. Action cannot destroy ignorance, as it is not opposed to ignorance. Knowledge verily destroys ignorance, just as light destroys deep darkness.
Yes. So once upon a time, there was a king, and he drank too much and smoked dope. He goes to bed, and the lamps burn out, and he's still loaded, and he awakes in the middle of the night. Ah, it's dark. And he calls for the servants. He says, bring brooms, sweep out the darkness. What happens if you try to sweep out the darkness?
It's hot and sweaty.
It's still there.
I'm walking along the street and my shadow falls in the gutter. Oh, get a hose. I need to wash off my shadow. So Shankara thunders. My problem is the non-apprehension of my essential nature. It is avidya, ignorance, ajnanam, ignorance. There's another word for ignorance. Antidote to ignorance is vidya, knowledge. Now, this knowledge is not what we call paroksha jnana, indirect knowledge. It is a direct experience, aparoksha jnana. Let me give you an example. So a young girl, she's 7, 8 years old, and she's taking sex education in middle school. She's learning about orgasms. Teacher, will I know it? Seems kind of weird. Teacher says, don't worry. And then 11, 12, 13, she begins to go into adolescence. She begins to explore her body. And then she finds something very wonderful. She now has a direct experience. Probably would have found it whether she read the book or not. But there's a big difference between reading the book and the direct experience. So the paroksha jnana, the indirect knowledge you gain through the teacher, gain through reading the scriptures, you gain through YouTube. It's at best a little intellectual satisfaction for the scholar. But it needs to inform our abhyasa, our practice, so that in an auspicious moment, when the mind has become still, Swamiji used to say, when the last thought is thoughted, before the next thought is thoughting, with the attentive faculty turn within. Who are you? What is your essential nature? Then there's this flash in the subtle intellect. Ah, there's nobody there. That flash of insight is technically called pratyabhignana, recognition. It's the aha moment. So we go from paroksha jnanam to aparoksha jnanam, direct experience. Swamiji used to say you could read a book about electricity, but if you unscrew the light bulb and turn the lamp on, now you know electricity. So we have to make this distinction. So again, back to what you were saying, of course there's these cultural norms. But all of those are still at the level of preparatory. And all the great mystic traditions ultimately resolve themselves into self-inquiry in some form or another. Next verse. This is number 4 or number 3?
It's 4.
4.
Parichinna iba jnana tannashe sati kevala swayam prakashate yatma meghapayenam sumainava. The self appears to be finite because of ignorance. When ignorance is destroyed, it is recognized to be infinite, absolute. The self reveals itself by itself, like the sun when the clouds pass away.
So, what is the ignorance? What's it made of? How does it function? Later on, we're going to get introduced to this idea of vasana. Now, we covered this in the last class. A vasana is a subset of sanskara. Sanskara is an impression. Do you know that's a table? Yes. How do you know it's a table? You were taught that it's a table. That's a sanskara. It's not problematic. You don't suffer because you know it's a table. You know this is a lamp. You know this is a chair. But there's a subset of sanskara, which is vasana. Comes from the root vasati, which means to linger or to dwell overnight. So sometimes, is it Monday nights where you come in with that lovely fragrance? Oh, I just love it. It's like a goddess is coming to the room. I don't know what it is, but I just love the fragrance. But see, when she leaves after class, the fragrance stays behind. So it's an impression left in the unconscious as the result of previously performed egoistic actions, meaning it has I-ness and minus wrapped up with it. I have an experience, and after the experience, I engage in what's called chintya. In Hindi, chintya means worry. In Sanskrit, it means after the fact, thinking about stuff. You go to the pizza place, you go, oh, that was incredible pizza. Gee, I think we should go back there. Well, a bunch of us are going to get together on Friday. Maybe we can go there. Or the opposite. Did you taste that ramen at that place? It was awful. Never going back there. So it leaves an impression. These are vasana. We have millions of them. A vasana has 2 powers. Avarana Shakti and Vikshepa Shakti. Varana Shakti means veiling power. Vikshepa Shakti means projecting power. When my mind is under the influence of vasana, the result is the non-apprehension of my essential nature in my mind. I do not know who I really am. Then comes the Vikshepa Shakti, the projecting power. Comes from the root chipati, which means to like throw or hurl a spear. And the mind then projects 3 things right at the same time. Ego sense, I think I'm a person, meaning I'm identified with my body. The world of name is solid and real and separate from me. And that's where joy and misery are. So struggle is in there. Kartavya. All arise together. It is just like what happens at night. So at night I go to my bed, then I fall asleep. That is the non-apprehension of myself as the waker. Avadana Shakti. And I start to dream. Vikshepa Shakti. And in the dream, I've got a dream body with a dream ego. And I perceive a world of name and form outside and thoughts and feelings inside. Now, in truth, it's all just imagination, but I do not know it. And if I'm having an anxiety-filled dream, to the dream ego, I've got to resolve whatever issue it is in the dream. Yoga says, wake up. Now, where does the Avadana Shakti and the Vikshepa Shakti go when I wake up in the morning? So, because of ignorance, I think I'm the body plus the personality. I do not know I'm that witnessing consciousness. Would you read it one more time to make sure I got all the pieces, because we've got to quit pretty soon.
The self appears to be finite because of ignorance. When ignorance is destroyed, it is recognized to be infinite, absolute. The self reveals itself by itself, like the sun when the clouds pass away.
Yes. So when the spiritual ignorance is removed, the self reveals itself by itself. And we don't have time to go into that. We'll work on the very last part of that verse next week. That's verse 5, 4. Okay. We'll have to end here tonight.
Right, because the whole infinite aspect of the self.
We'll get into
We didn't get to tonight, yeah.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om.